frozen world far away. A place where the ground was hard ice and the sky was always dark. Even as a child, she had learned to live in the cold. She had learned how to hide her hands inside her clothes, how to keep her breathing slow so the freezing air would not hurt her lungs. Warmth was only a dream. She had never touched it, never trusted it. Now she lived on a broken space station, drifting between trade routes. The corridors were narrow and dark, the walls covered with frost from the failing heating system. The station was supposed to be a busy stop for traders and travelers, but most people had left long ago. Only the desperate remained, smugglers, runaways, and people like her who had nowhere else to go. Every night, Zara searched for a corner where the lights were dim and the security drones would not find her. She would curl up on the metal floor, pressing her body into the cold. Her blanket was thin, more holes than cloth when she tried to sleep. The shivers would not stop. Her people could survive low temperatures. But this kind of cold was not about survival. It was about loneliness. One night, she sat against the wall in one of the old cargo bays. Her knees were pulled to her chest, and her eyes stayed half open. You could never truly sleep here. Footsteps echoed through the hallways. Usually she ignored them, but tonight they sounded different. Heavy, slow, but confident. Not the quick steps of someone running away. Not the uneven steps of a drunk trader. These footsteps belonged to someone who was not afraid. She tilted her head, trying to see through the shadows. From around the corner, a tall figure appeared. It was a human. Zara had seen humans before, but she had never spoken to one. They were warm-blooded creatures from a green and blue planet, always wearing thick jackets, even when she thought the air was fine. This one had short, dark hair, a tired face, and eyes that scanned the room like he was looking for something or someone. His gaze landed on her, and for a moment they just stared at each other. Zara thought he might tell her to leave, or worse, call the drones. Instead, he stepped closer, his boots making a slow echo on the metal floor. "How long have you been sleeping here?" he asked. His voice was calm, but there was a weight to it, like he had seen too much. Zara did not answer. Her people believed that words could be dangerous if you gave them to the wrong person. They could be used against you. The man crouched down so they were at the same eye level. "You're freezing," he said quietly. "This place. It's colder than it should be." She kept her silence, watching him carefully. The human didn't seem angry, only concerned. Concern was not something she often saw here. He looked at her thin blanket and frowned. Then, to her surprise, he said, "Come with me." Zara blinked. She didn't move. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I have a bed," he said simply. "It's warm." The words felt strange in her ears. A bed. Warmth, things she had never been offered before. Her first thought was that it was a trick. Maybe he wanted something in return. That was how life worked. On the station, no one gave without taking, but something in his face was different. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't trying to charm her. He was just waiting, letting her decide. Zara's heartbeat was slow but heavy. She thought about the frost on her blanket, the way her fingers had been numb for hours, the way her bones felt like ice. She stood up slowly, still keeping a distance between them. The man nodded and started walking. Zara followed him through the dark corridors, her steps light and careful. Every turn they took made her more tense, but then they reached a door unlike the others. It slid open with a soft hiss, and a wave of warm air touched her face. Zara froze. The warmth wrapped around her like an invisible blanket. Her skin prickled. Her chest felt lighter. It was almost too much. She didn't remember ever breathing air that felt this soft. "This way," the human said, stepping inside. Zara followed, her eyes scanning the room. It was small, with a narrow bed, a table, and a heating unit humming quietly in the corner. It smelled different here. not like the cold metal of the station, but like cloth, food, and something she could not name. 4. The first time in her life, she wondered if warmth could be real, and if she could trust the human who had given it to her. Almost too soft. Like it might melt her if she let it. Her people were used to the bite of the cold, the sting that kept you awake. This heat was dangerous in its own way. It could make you lower your guard. The human, Ethan, watched her from across the room. He didn't rush her. Didn't speak again right away. He simply walked to the table and poured something into a cup. Steam curled up into the air. Zara's eyes followed it. She had only seen steam in broken pipes, and even then it had smelled of rust and oil. This was different. Ethan held out the cup. "It's hot tea," he said. "It will help." Zara stayed still, her hands buried inside her sleeves. In her world, taking food or drink from a stranger meant you accepted their claim over you. But her lips were cracked, her throat dry, and the smell was not unpleasant. Slowly, she stepped forward and took the cup. Her fingers trembled as she wrapped them around it. The heat burned at first, but she didn't let go. She brought it close and took a careful sip. The warmth slid down her throat, and she had to close her eyes for a moment. It felt like fire that did not hurt. "You've been here a long time, haven't you?" Ethan asked. Zara opened her eyes but didn't answer. He sighed, leaning back against the table. "This station. It's dying," he said. "No one should be living in the cold corridors." Zara wanted to tell him she had nowhere else to go, but she kept her words locked inside instead. She studied him. His clothes were worn but clean. His hands had the marks of someone who worked with machines. He didn't look like a soldier or a traitor. She couldn't guess why he was here. Then he said the words again. Slower this time. "Stay here, tonight." Her head tilted slightly. "I have a bed," he continued. "It's warm. And you look like you haven't slept in days." Zara's chest tightened. Her people had a saying. The warm hand can also be the sharpest knife. Warmth could trap you. Kindness could be a cage. She wanted to ask what he wanted in return. But something in his face made her pause. "You don't trust me," Ethan said. Not as a question, but as a fact. She shook her head, just slightly. "I wouldn't either," he admitted, "but I'm not going to hurt you." The way he said it was simple, without trying to convince her. That almost made her trust him more. Ethan stepped aside and gestured toward the bed. Zara's eyes flicked to it. The blanket was thick, the pillow soft. She had seen beds in passing before, in the rooms of traders and dock workers, but she had never touched one. The thought of lying on something that wasn't metal made her heart beat faster. But before she could decide, a sound echoed in the corridor outside. It was faint, but both of them heard its slow footsteps, stopping just outside the door. Zara froze, gripping the cup tighter. Ethan's eyes shifted toward the entrance, his body tense. The footsteps stayed for a few seconds, then moved on. Only when the sound faded did he speak again. "This station has ears," Ethan said. "Not all of them friendly." Zara's gaze snapped to him. "Why?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Some people here like to know who's where, who owes what." She set the cup down on the table. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp. Ethan didn't flinch. "Nothing," he said, "except maybe that you stop sleeping on frozen floors." It was such a strange answer that Zara almost laughed. But she didn't. Instead, she studied his face again. Looking for a lie, she didn't find one, but that didn't mean it wasn't there. Finally, she moved toward the bed. Her steps were slow, each one feeling heavier than it should. She reached out and touched the blanket. It was soft, far softer than her old rag of a cover. For a moment, she just stood there, her hand resting on it. Then, carefully, she sat down. The warmth rose up through the fabric and into her legs. She felt her shoulders relax without meaning to. Ethan turned away, giving her space. He sat at the table, working on a small device. Letting her have silence, Zara lay back, still keeping her eyes open. She didn't trust the door, didn't trust the walls. Didn't trust him, not yet, but... Her body was starting to give in. Her eyelids grew heavy. The hum of the heater filled the room, steady and low. It was the first steady sound she had heard in years. And just as she was about to slip into sleep, she heard it again, that faint scratching at the door. It was too light to be footsteps. Too slow to be machinery. Ethan's head turned. His eyes sharp, neither of them spoke. The sound came once more, then stopped. Zara's heart beat faster. She didn't know what was outside. As she knew this, the cold wasn't the only danger in the station. The thick blanket covering her body, the heat wrapping around her like a strange, invisible hand. It felt wrong to feel this comfortable, felt even more wrong to feel it in. A place she did not trust. Ethan sat at the small table, fixing a small metal device with a pair of tools. He didn't look at her much. But she could feel his awareness, like he was keeping track of every movement she made. The heater hummed. The soft light from the wall panels made shadows on the floor. It was all too calm, and calm was not something Zara believed in. She kept her eyes on the door. That scratching sound from earlier still echoed in her memory. She had heard noises in the station before, rats in the vents, pipes shifting, even thieves moving in the dark. But this had been different. It had been slow, patient, like whoever or whatever it was had been listening. Ethan noticed her stare. "You're thinking about the sound?" He said quietly. Zara didn't answer, but her jaw tightened. "It's probably nothing," he added, though his tone was not certain. "Nothing doesn't stop outside your door," she said, her voice low. Ethan's eyes lifted to hers. And for a second, the air between them felt heavier. To distract her, or maybe himself, Ethan began talking. He told her about Earth, his home, about sunlight that touched your skin without burning, about oceans so big you couldn't see the end, about forests where the air smelled of green life. Zara tried to imagine it, but her mind kept replacing the warm colors with gray and white. She had never seen a sky that wasn't dark. "Where are you from?" Ethan asked after a while. "A place that doesn't matter anymore," she said. Her voice was flat, but inside her chest, the words hurt. She had not spoken the name of her home in years. It was easier to let it fade. The hours passed. Zara's body wanted to rest, but her mind kept alert. She had lived too long in the cold corridors to believe in safety. She turned to look at Ethan again and found that his eyes had grown heavier too. He was leaning back in his chair, half asleep but still upright. He didn't snore, didn't even make a sound. It was like even in sleep, he stayed ready. Her own eyelids began to close. The bed was pulling her in, and the heat was making her muscles loosen for a moment. She allowed herself to believe she could sleep without danger. Then she heard it again, the scratching. This time, it was closer. Right at the bottom of the door, her eyes flew open, and she sat up. Ethan's head snapped toward the sound immediately. They locked eyes, and without a word, he stood and moved toward the door. Zara's breath quickened. She pulled the blanket off her legs and moved silently to the corner of the room. Her hands curled into fists, though she had nothing to fight with. Ethan pressed his ear to the door. Listening, the scratching stopped, replaced by something softer. A slow, deliberate tap, 3 times, then silence. Zara's skin prickled. "What is it?" she asked. Ethan shook his head, not sure. He opened a small drawer by the table and pulled out a compact blaster. Zara's eyes narrowed, so he was armed, but he didn't aim it, just kept it ready. He stepped back from the door, waiting. Nothing came. After a long minute, he finally slid the weapon back into the drawer. Could have been a scavenger, he said. Scavengers don't knock, Zara replied. He didn't argue. Instead, he went to the heater and adjusted it. Then, turned to her. You should try to rest. She almost laughed. You think I can sleep after that? Ethan gave a small shrug. You'll be warmer in the bed than out there. She returned to the bed, but didn't lie down right away. Instead, she sat with her back to the wall. Her eyes on the door. Ethan didn't press her. Just went back to the table and worked on his device again. The room stayed quiet except for the low hum of the heater. After a while, her head tilted, her body giving in despite her will. Her last thought before sleep took her was that this was the first time in years she hadn't had to fight the cold to survive the night. And in the drifting space between waking and dreams, she wondered if warmth could be trusted. But in the darkness outside the room, footsteps were moving again, slow, patient, and getting closer. Sunrise here. Only the slow change of lights in the corridors, from dim to slightly brighter. Zara woke to the sound of soft movement in the room. Ethan was already up, pulling on his boots and checking the small blaster he had kept in the drawer. She sat up slowly, the blanket sliding off her shoulders. The air outside the bed was cooler, but not freezing. Still, she noticed the comfort was gone as soon as she left the warmth. We need food, Ethan said, without looking at her. He spoke like it was an order. Not a suggestion. Zara didn't argue. Her body needed it. Though her mind still told her to be careful, they stepped into the corridor. The door sliding shut behind them. Zara kept close to Ethan, but stayed alert. The station was quiet. Too quiet for the number of people who still lived here. The metal walls were covered in frost patches, the air heavy with the smell of oil and dust. As they walked, Zara felt eyes on her. It wasn't just her imagination. She caught glimpses of faces in dark corners, people turning away when she looked. A tall figure with a scar over his cheek muttered something to another man as they passed. She couldn't hear the words. But she didn't like the way they looked at her. They reached the market section, if it could be called that. A few stalls were open, selling packets of dry food and bottles of water. The vendors didn't greet them, only watched with cautious eyes. Ethan picked up a few items, sliding them into his pack. When he turned to pay, Zara stayed back, scanning the crowd. That's when she saw him. A man standing at the far end of the market, half hidden in shadow. His coat was long and dark, his head covered by a hood. But it wasn't his clothing that caught her attention. It was his eyes. They were fixed on her. Unblinking, Zara froze. The man raised his hand slightly, and in a voice so low she almost thought she imagined it. He spoke in her language. The human will betray you. Before the warmth fades, her chest tightened. She hadn't heard her native tongue in years. Before she could respond, Ethan returned. Let's go, he said, handing her a small pack of food. When she looked back to the corner, the man was gone. No footsteps, no sign of him leaving. It was like he had melted into the shadows. They walked back through the corridors in silence. Ethan seemed focused on getting to his room, but Zara's mind was elsewhere. Who was that man? How did he know her language? And why had he given her a warning instead of a threat? When they reached the door, Zara stopped. Someone spoke to me, she said quietly. Ethan looked at her. Where? In the market, she replied. He said you would betray me. Ethan's expression didn't change much, but she caught the quick flicker in his eyes. What did he look like? Tall, hooded, hiding in the corner, he nodded slowly. You shouldn't listen to people like that. Zara narrowed her eyes. Why? Not? Because on this station, lies are cheap, and the truth costs too much, he said. It was an answer, but not the one she wanted. Inside the room, the heater was still running. Zara sat on the bed, her food untouched. She kept replaying the moment in her head, the tone of the voice, the strange calm in it. If it had been a threat, she could have ignored it, but a warning. Warnings meant someone knew something. Ethan noticed her silence. "You're thinking about it," he said. "Yes," she replied simply. "Then here's something to think about." He said, "This station. It's full of people who want things they don't deserve. And they'll use any words they can to get them." Zara didn't answer. She knew his point was to make her doubt the man in the market, but instead, it made her more curious hours. Passed without another word about it, Zara stayed in the room while Ethan went out again. She didn't ask where he was going, and he didn't tell her. But when he returned, there was a shadow in his eyes. Something had happened out there, and he wasn't talking about it. That night, she lay awake again. The corridor outside was silent, but silence was not safety. Her mind kept circling the warning before the warmth fades. Was that a hint of danger, or just a cruel trick to make her distrust Ethan? Either way, she knew one thing. The shadows in this station weren't just in the corners. They were moving, watching, and waiting, and soon they would. Step into the light. The air cooler, and the hum of the heater in Ethan's room was the only steady sound. Zara sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. Ethan was across the room working on the same small device he always seemed to be fixing. The silence between them had stretched thin. Finally, she spoke. "Why did you help me?" Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. Ethan didn't look up right away. He twisted a wire, tightened a screw, then set the device down. When he did meet her eyes, there was something unreadable in them. "Because I remember someone," he said. "Someone like you." Zara frowned. "Like me?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting to the wall as if he was looking far beyond it. "Years ago, during a border skirmish near the outer colonies, I was stranded, my ship damaged, oxygen running low." He said slowly, "A patrol ship found me, but it wasn't human." Zara stayed silent. "She was from your kind," Ethan continued. "She could have left me there, but she didn't." He paused, a shadow passing over his face. "She pulled me onto her ship, gave me air, even shared her ration heat." Zara's eyes narrowed. "Ration heat?" Ethan nodded. "A small thermal stone your kind uses in deep freeze conditions. She pressed it into my hands until my fingers worked again." For the first time, Zara saw something different in his eyes. A weight, a memory that wasn't just words. "What happened to her?" Zara asked. Ethan's jaw tightened. "She was killed. Shot down before we reached the safe zone." The heater hummed, filling the silence between them. "She saved my life," Ethan said. "And I couldn't save hers." Zara looked away, unsure how to answer. Part of her wanted to believe him, but part of her still remembered the hooded man's warning in the market. Before she could ask more, a sudden blaring alarm ripped through the station. The room's light shifted to a deep red, and a voice crackled over the old CUM system. "Security breach, Section 4. Intruders on board." Zara's head snapped toward Ethan. His face had already gone tense, his hand reaching for the blaster in the drawer. "They're searching rooms," Ethan said quickly. "Who?" Zara asked, her voice sharper now. He didn't answer. "Only move to the wall panel and shut off the main light. Pack whatever you have, we can't stay here." Zara slid off the bed, her heartbeat quickening. The alarm kept pulsing through, the air echoing down the metal corridors outside through the thin walls. She could hear doors opening, voices shouting orders, the heavy thud of boots. Ethan grabbed a small black pack from under the table. Inside, Zara caught a glimpse of ration, bars, extra ammo, and a data chip sealed in clear plastic. She didn't miss the way his hand stayed close to the chip before he zipped the pack shut. They moved toward the door, but before Ethan opened it, Zara spoke. "They're here for me, aren't they?" Ethan glanced at her, his eyes unreadable. "Again, maybe," he said. "Or maybe they're here for what I'm carrying." Zara's gaze dropped to the pack. "What's in it?" She pressed. He didn't answer. Instead, he opened the door just a crack. Peering into the corridor, two armed men in dark armor were moving past, their helmets reflecting the dim red light. Ethan closed the door quickly. "We'll use the service." "Tunnels," he said. Zara hesitated. "You've done this before." He met her eyes, too many times. They slipped out through a small maintenance hatch at the back of the room. The narrow tunnel beyond was cold and smelled of rust. Zara crawled behind Ethan, her hands brushing the frozen walls. Every few meters, she heard the muffled sound of boots above them. The intruders were moving fast, sweeping each section in the dark. Her thoughts were loud. If Ethan was telling the truth, he was helping her because of a debt, because of a memory. But if the hooded man was right, Ethan could be using her for something else entirely. Either way, the danger outside was real. And right now, he was the only thing between her and whatever waited beyond those armored men. They reached a vertical shaft. Ethan climbed first, pulling himself up with quiet, practiced movements. Zara followed, her fingers slipping slightly on the icy metal, halfway up. She looked down. Faint light flickered far below, followed by the sound of voices. They were coming. When they finally reached the next hatch, Ethan pushed it open just enough to look. "This section's clear," he whispered. They climbed out into a dim hallway, lined with storage doors. Ethan closed the hatch behind them and adjusted the pack on his shoulder. His eyes scanned the shadows ahead. "We need to get to the docking bay before they cut it off," he said. Zara's gaze lingered on him. She didn't know if she could trust his story. She didn't know if he was a savior or someone leading her into a different kind of trap. But the truth about Ethan, whatever it was, would reveal itself soon, and she wasn't sure she was ready to hear it. Ethan moved ahead, his steps light but quick. Zara followed close, every muscle tense, her eyes scanning every doorway, every shadow somewhere in the distance. She could still hear the faint echo of boots. The intruders were not far. Ethan stopped at a corner and peered around it. Clear for now, he turned to Zara, his voice low. "Docking bay is 2 levels down. We'll take the service lift. It's quieter than the main one." Zara nodded, but her mind was turning fast. The hooded man's words still clung to her thoughts. "The human will betray you before the warmth fades." Every step she took felt like it was leading her closer to the moment she would have to decide if that warning was true. As they moved, she noticed something strange. Ethan kept touching the pack slung over his shoulder. It was quick, almost unconscious, but it was enough for her to know whatever was in there mattered more to him than anything else. She wanted to ask again what he was carrying, but now didn't feel like the right time. She needed him to get her out of here, at least for now. They reached the service lift, a narrow metal platform hidden behind a storage panel. Ethan tapped. The controls and the door slid open with a soft hiss. The lift was cold, the walls lined with frost. Zara stepped inside, standing in the far corner while Ethan pressed the button for level 2. The lift groaned as it moved. The sound made her uneasy. "This thing always sounds like it's dying," she asked quietly. "Everything on this station sounds like it's dying." Ethan replied without looking at her. Halfway down, the lift jerked suddenly. Zara's hands shot to the rail, her heart racing. Ethan's head snapped up the small display showed the lift had stopped between levels. Then, faintly, they heard its footsteps above them. Slow, heavy, deliberate, Ethan killed the lights inside the lift. They stood in near darkness. A shadow moved across the small gap above. Zara's breathing slowed. Her eyes locked on the ceiling. The steps paused right above them for a moment. She was sure whoever it was could hear her heartbeat. Then the sound moved away, fading into the distance. Ethan turned the lights back on. His jaw tight. "Change of plan," he said. Pressing another button, the lift shuddered and began moving down again, stopping at a maintenance level instead of the docking bay. When the doors opened, the air was colder, the lights dimmer. The maintenance level was a maze of pipes, vents, and crates stacked high. It was also quieter. No footsteps here, just the drip of water from overhead. Ethan led the way through the narrow paths. "This route is longer, but safer," he said. Zara followed. But her mind wouldn't let go of the thought that safer for him didn't always mean safer for her. After several minutes, they reached a junction where two corridors split. Ethan stopped, glancing at both. "This way," he said, stepping toward the left passage, but Zara didn't move. She stayed where she was, her eyes narrowing. "How do I know you're not taking me somewhere I can't get out of?" she asked. Ethan turned slowly to face her. "You don't," he said simply. Her hand tightened on the edge of her sleeve. "You could leave right now," he added, his voice calm. "Turn down the other corridor. Find your own way, Zara." Studied him, trying to see if there was any hint of a trap in his tone, but his face gave nothing away. It was the choice. Go alone and risk getting caught, or follow him and risk the warning being true. She stepped closer, her voice low. "If you betray me, I'll know," she said. Ethan gave the smallest nod. "Then keep walking," he replied. They moved together through the left corridor, the shadows swallowing them with each step. The cold bit at Zara's skin again, but not as sharply as it used to. She wondered if her body had already grown used to warmth, and if that would make the cold feel worse when it returned. As they neared another door, a noise behind them made them both turn. The sound of boots. Running, getting closer, Ethan didn't hesitate. He yanked the door open and pushed her through. They found themselves in a narrow docking tunnel, the end of it glowing with the faint light of the bay beyond. "This is it," Ethan said, his voice low but urgent. Zara's heart raced. Every step toward that light felt heavier. Once they crossed into the bay, there would be no turning back. If she was wrong about trusting him, she would know it too late. The choice had been made. All she could do now was walk it. Flowed through it, carrying the faint smell of engine fuel and dust. At the far end, the glow of the bay lights was like the promise of escape. But behind them, the sound of boots was growing louder. Ethan moved fast, his steps quiet but urgent. Zara followed, her pulse pounding in her ears. She kept glancing over her shoulder, catching shadows moving at the far end of the tunnel. They were coming, and they were not far. As they neared the bay entrance, the air filled with the low hum of engines. Ships were docked in neat rows, most of them small cargo haulers and old transports. But the bay itself was almost empty of people. The security teams must have been pulled away to search other sectors. Ethan led her to a small, narrow craft in the corner of the bay. It was scratched, patched with different metals, and looked like it had seen better years, but its engines were already warm. A faint heat radiating from its hull. He must have prepared it before. She realized this wasn't sudden for him. He had been planning. Zara stopped just short of the ramp. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Ethan glanced back, his hand already on the hatch control. "I told you," he said. "Someone like you once saved me. Now it's my turn." The boots in the tunnel behind them grew louder. Shouts echoed. They had been spotted. Ethan hit the hatch control, and the ramp lowered with a hiss. "Inside, now," he said. Zara hesitated only for a second before running up the ramp. The air inside the ship was warmer, cleaner. She could smell recycled oxygen and faint traces of engine oil. Ethan closed the hatch behind them and moved quickly to the cockpit. Zara followed, bracing herself against the wall as the ship hummed to life. Through the narrow viewport, she saw dark armored figures rushing into the bay. Weapons in hand, the ship lifted off the deck, engines roaring louder. Blaster fire flashed past the viewport, striking the bay walls. Ethan's hands moved fast over the controls. "Hold on," he said, and the ship shot forward. The sudden force pressed Zara back into her seat, her stomach lurching. The docking bay walls blurred as they sped toward the exit. Then they were in open space, stars spilling across the black. Zara exhaled, only then realizing she had been holding her breath. But the danger wasn't over. A small security craft had broken from the station. Chasing them, Ethan's jaw tightened as he adjusted their course. Weaving through debris and old cargo containers floating in orbit, the security craft fired. A bolt grazing their hull and sending a vibration through the ship, Zara gripped the edge of her seat. "Can you outrun them?" she asked. "Not for long," Ethan replied, "but I can outsmart them." He veered sharply toward a dense asteroid cluster. The security craft followed, but the rocks grew thicker, forcing it to slow. Ethan navigated through the twisting paths. Like he had done it 100 times, finally. The radar blinked. The pursuing ship had turned back. Silence settled in the cockpit. Ethan leaned back slightly, his hands still steady on the controls. Zara's heartbeat began to slow, but her thoughts didn't. "You could have left me," she said. Ethan's gaze stayed forward. "I told you I wouldn't." She looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of deception. But all she found was exhaustion and something else, relief. The ship's autopilot took over, and Ethan stood, moving to the small storage compartment. He pulled out the thick blanket she had used in his room and handed it to her. Zara hesitated, then took it, wrapping it around herself. It was still warm. Carrying the faint scent of his quarters, she studied him again. The hooded man's warning still whispered at the back of her mind, but here, in the quiet hum of the ship, with the cold of the station far behind them, it felt more distant. More like a shadow she could leave behind. "You gave me warmth," she said softly, her alien eyes meeting his. Ethan's lips twitched in the smallest smile. "Then keep it," he replied. They sat in silence as the ship drifted toward the stars. Outside, the black stretched endlessly. Dotted with distant lights, Zara leaned back in her seat, pulling the blanket tighter. For the first time in her life, she wasn't shivering. The warmth was real, and for now, it was hers, somewhere deep in her chest. The ice that had been there since birth began to crack.